Police officers of Reddit, was there a time you wanted to let someone off the hook but couldn't? And if so, what happened? I got a ticket one day by turning left. I didn't see the no left turn sign because all the construction crap. The next day I accidentally cut off the sheriff. Not an officer in the department, but the bloody big guy himself. What's worse, I didn't have my license and registration. I was a teen and a mess, so I handed him the ticket from the day before as proof of license and insurance. With a big unapologetic grin. Dude laughed so hard he had to hold on to my car. Didn't give me a ticket. I still wave hi to him when I see him. Chill dude. Obligatory not a cop comment. I'm sorry, but I am a criminal defense attorney, and I have to be vague about this. Because privilege. I had a client who charged with public intox. But this person was not drunk. Just off their meds and manic. I watched all the body cam footage. 5 cops responded. And all but one wanted to book my client in on more serious charges. The one who didn't straight up said, I am not comfortable taking this person to jail. They need to go to the hospital. A supervisor was called in and overruled him, telling all the cops there to book client in on 3 serious charges, one of which was a felony. The one cop recognized the situation for what it was and literally took my client out of another cop's car and booked them into jail like he was told. But booked them in on public intox because he knew it was the most minor offense he possibly could. And his report made it very clear what he thought about the whole thing, which made my end and dealing with the DA easier. I respect the hell out of him. Just after high school, I had just showed up to a party in the woods. No sooner had I grabbed the beer than about 5 cop cars come flying in. Lights blaring. Keep in mind, I haven't drank a thing, but my mind went run. As I start running down this path, a cop starts following me in his car. Fat guy. Wasn't very fast. I realize I'm not getting away and stop running. He comes up to me laughing and says, good choice, big boy, and cuffs me and sits me down back up at the fire. I proceed to tell him everything and he laughs and gives me a breathalyzer. Once he knows I wasn't bullshitting him, he just says, okay, have a good night. Best cop ever. Edit. Forgot to mention. A few years later my wife and I were visiting my parents in the same town. And he pulled me over for speeding. He walks up to the window, looks in and laughs. Slow down big boy. Then drives away. Body cameras have changed how we operate. Big time. I love them and record far more than policy dictates, but they do diminish our ability to make decisions based on circumstances. For instance, a couple weeks ago I handled a simple shoplifter. He was homeless and genuinely seemed like a decent guy stealing things he needed to survive. However, the entire encounter was on body camera. How can I justify not taking one shoplifter to jail, then turning around and taking the next? How do I know their personal circumstances? Make no mistake that attorneys are requesting our body camera footage for everything we do. The fear of finding discrepancies in how we handle situations is real. There are less breaks given now, and if you give one, it better be consistent to everyone who violates the same law. In the end, I still prefer to record everything and will take that loss of discretion over getting sued. Edit. Thank you all for the kind words and excellent discussion. Also for the gold. I just started my 12 hours shift, so I'm having trouble keeping up with comments. Trying to do so between calls. I live in a small town in North Texas. While I was 5 months pregnant last spring, I was speeding on an open stretch of highway to get to the nearest gas station so I didn't piss my pants. All 12 flipped on his lights and I considered my options. I pulled over. Right the FCK over. This little baby-faced officer approaches my window and says, morning mom. Know why I pulled you over? To which I said, cause I'm hauling ass. I totally deserve this ticket and will even say so in court if you, for the love of God, just follow me to the next exit so I can pee in a toilet and not in this seat. Seeing my obviously pregnant belly, he stammered, yes mom. Right away. He did just that. Only in front of me. With his lights going. He even changed the lights to green. He waited until I finished just to ask if he could help me with anything else. He said he wouldn't be giving me a ticket that day as his wife had a 3-day-old baby at home and he'd broken many a speed limits to get her to a toilet. I bawled. Then sent him an edible arrangement and a thank you card for going above and beyond his call of duty. Double quote. My dad used to tell us that if he ever pulled someone over and they said what can I say? You got me, he'd let them go. This was probably also depending on the offense. I assume nobody ever said it. He'd tell stories of people who'd say what can I say? And he'd be waiting for the next part but it never came. So he didn't let them go because they didn't say it fully. Edit. I've had a few people ask if this is a reference to anything. As far as I'm aware, it's not. I asked his best mate just now. Who knew his obscure references? It was just his own little thing. Not a reference. Edit 2. More people have suggested Breaking Bad. Dad never watched it and he'd resigned from the job in 1999. Long before the show came out. My parents have always told me this story. So it may or may not be embellished. In the middle of night when my mom went into labor with me, my dad pulled up to a 4-way intersection. Waiting to take a left at a red light. This was back in 1989. So who knows if sensors existed. But for whatever reason, the light wasn't turning. My dad had gotten sick of my mom screaming at him to just go. So he did. As he took the left, a cop pulled out behind him and tried pulling him over. My mom apparently wouldn't let my dad pull over. So the cop followed them into the hospital parking lot. My parents and the officer each got out of their vehicles. No words were exchanged. The cop just stood there and watched my parents walk up and into the hospital. I guess he left a note on the vehicle saying congrats. Just had to be sure or something like that. I've always been told I had a police escort to the hospital the night I was born. Yeah. A few years ago I responded to a domestic incident between a lifelong family friend and his wife who knew my family before I was even born. Talk about awkward. Being directly in the middle of a personal argument of people that watched me grow up from the moment I was born. Ultimately the male half had pushed the female during the argument and was arrested. He admitted to it and whatnot, so there was no question it occurred. I have no tolerance for domestic abuse, and arresting for domestic abuse is one part of the job that makes me feel like I'm actually making a difference, if not just for one person that shift. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel bad while processing the arrest. This guy otherwise was a saint and helped my family out a ton in more ways than one. But what can ya do? It was awkward. I don't feel like I did the wrong thing at all. But I just sort of wish the guy was able to control his temper so I didn't have to deal with that. An old roommate was a police officer and once she had a shopkeeper detain a shoplifter. When she got there it was a young kid. 11 or 12. Stealing a carton of eggs and a couple boxes of cereal. He looked totally malnourished and unwashed. She eventually got it out of him that he didn't have food at home. She called social services. Of course. But she asked the shopkeeper to just let the kid go so he could deal with CPS without this added stress or a spot on an otherwise clean record. The shopkeeper insisted. Wouldn't let up. She didn't know what happened to the kid after that. But didn't think it could be anything good. Found a couple homeless teenagers in a park after dark, which is illegal in my area. They had bicycles and a trailer with them. One of them lied about his name because he had a warrant and I arrested him when I figured out who he was. The second was chill the whole time. Didn't lie and wasn't a problem. I was going to cut him loose. My sergeant shows up and notices that the park has some graffiti on the tables and accuses the chill kid of doing it. The graffiti wasn't wet. The kid said he didn't do it but he still had art materials in his bag. Some markers and a sketchbook. The sergeant made me take the markers and book as evidence. The kid says, "Dude, that is my only art outlet and the only thing that makes me happy right now." Sergeant didn't care. I had to follow orders. Sometimes the job just sucks. I worked third shift for a city police dept. Had turned around at the city limits when I clocked a vehicle traveling 80 plus mph coming towards me. I hit the lights and turned on it, since I was leaving the city to catch him. And actually figured this was going to be a pursuit. It was policy to advise dispatch what was going on. So grab the mic. Badge number. Dispatch, I just turned on a vehicle traveling 85 eastbound out of the city. Stop the car. And it's a soldier. Still in BDUs that had just got back from Iraq or Afghanistan. I can't remember that day and was headed home to see his family. Did not want to write the ticket. Told him I didn't want to write the ticket. Since I'd said that on the radio though, I had to write it. Told him to come to court. And I do what I could to get it dismissed. Talked to the judge. And at traffic court judge dismissed his ticket and thanked him for his service. Felt about 3 inches tall writing that dang ticket. Here. One time I arrested a girl for DUI around 8 or 9 in the morning. She put her car into a ditch. After I placed her under arrest, I found out that the reason she decided to drive drunk was to get away from a house party where she may have been sexually assaulted, raped. Why she didn't call someone to pick her up, I don't know. Maybe she felt like had to leave right away. I processed her for DUI and released her to her mother. I encouraged the mother to take her to the hospital and file a report with the sheriff's office. Happened in the county. Not sure what legally happened to her. It would have been up to the prosecutor to reduce drop charges for the DUI. Friend is a cop. Went to a shoplifting call and the guy was homeless. Said he needed some new underwear and was already wearing it as he put it on in the change room and he was hiding under a car. He was forced to take off the underwear and mind you my friend said it was filthy so the store was forced to just throw it away. My friend felt bad for the homeless guy but had to take him in anyhow. The most memorable shoplifter I dealt with had some kind of cancer in his leg. He's a frequent flyer for us. And he lives in a tent in the woods. I responded to a call that a BM with dreads wearing an Adidas hoodie and walking with a limp had just shoplifted from the nearby Shell station. I'm like, that's that cancer dude. So I roll up to his tent. It's in the wood line behind an empty lot that is next to an extended stay motel. And I'm like, guy's name. Did you steal a bunch of stuff from the Shell station? Double quote. He pops his head out of the tent, chewing on stolen candy and says he was hungry and he was sorry. This dude weighs about 130 pounds and he's in his mid 40s. He took like $7 worth of junk food. I go back to the Shell station and pay for whatever he stole and then go back and give him my business card and tell him if he is ever hungry enough to steal something to just call me. Weeks later I dropped by with some canned chunky soup but his tent was collapsed and there was no sign of him. Haven't heard of him around since. But I like to imagine that he got the help he needed. When my best mate and me were 17 we were walking home through a dodgy part of town one night after a party. We sat down leaning on one side of a store. On the other side of the store across the parking lot there was a car idling and some guys standing around it. Whatever, we will leave them alone. Sitting down for about 5 minutes when one of the guys from across the lot ran around the corner and yelled cops. Double quote. I'm not sure why we ran but we did and we got to the end of the car park before the police stopped us. We still have no idea why we ran, we had nothing to hide. I think it was just because it happened so fast. So one officer talks to us and we tell him we don't know that guy and we made a mistake. I showed him my Catholic school ID card because it was the only ID I had. He was a nice guy about it and even laughed that we could be so naive and just run. We told the truth and the cop told us to take our alcohol back and just get home safe. The other guy lied and they took his alcohol and he was pissed. Saw him about a month later randomly and he remembered me. He told me all cops are dicks. That's probably true if you lie to them, lol. I got a call once to a Burger King and it was an anonymous tip that someone they had a warrant. Ran the info given by the caller and confirmed the warrant. Arrived at the Burger King and found the guy. Talked to him and asked if he knew he had a warrant. She said he didn't think he did. Normally I'd be like, yeah sure okay dude, but this guy was super nice and literally only been at Burger King for like 5 minutes on his lunch break. The warrant wound up being a 3 or 4 year old probation warrant, but because it was still active I had to take him to jail. I felt really bad about doing it to him since he was genuinely taking steps in the right direction to turn his life around and still wound up going to jail. My uncle is a university campus cop. Super friendly. Goofy. Funny guy. When I think of him I think of rambunctious card games. Cliff jumping. And him pinning me down to fart on me. As such, he got the nickname Officer Friendly. One time he caught a student smoking a joint on campus and as per his job asked him to hand it over. He expected the guy to hand over the joint. But the guy just started walking. My uncle followed the guy not knowing what was up. The guy kept walking to the university residence. Inside. And up to his room. He handed over 2 ounces of weed. Here. An ounce or more is considered trafficking. My uncle wasn't even planning to write this kid up. Just wanted him to stop smoking, obviously in the middle of campus. But at that about had to bust him for a trafficking level amount. Obligatory not a cop here. My husband got pulled over on his way home from work for an expired registration. He was an armored car guard. So he was wearing body armor and his gun belt. He was really afraid they were going to shoot him. But he was careful and the deputies were cool with him. They ran his license and he had a warrant. We'd had a problem with identity theft 5 years previously. And the warrant was a paperwork error. But it was too late to call and get it straightened out. So my husband got arrested although he was the victim of the crime. The officer called to tell me that my husband was being arrested. And started out by saying, "This is Officer so and so. And I'm calling because I've got your husband here." You can guess what I thought. I'd been expecting a call like that since my husband started that job. I thought he was calling because my husband was dead. He said no. Just arrested. And then kept apologizing over and over. Saying he wished he had never stopped my husband. Once he ran the license. He had no choice. He didn't mean to scare me. And so on. They didn't tow the car. And they let my husband leave his uniform shirt, body armor and weapon in the car so I could go get it. My husband still got arrested. But the next day a single phone call got everything cleared up. I was an MP in Germany. I was coming to an intersection and saw a car in the left turn lane that wasn't moving. I pulled up behind it and turned my light on assuming they were having car trouble. I walked up to the driver's window and talked to the woman driving and she told me she didn't know how to drive a stick shift. I didn't know how to proceed. So I called my desk sergeant on the radio and he told me to get her license because she might have restrictions on it. I walked back to the vehicle and asked for her overseas military license and she said she didn't have one. I then asked if I could just get her stateside license and she told me she didn't have one of those either. Again. I backed away from the car and asked the DS for guidance. He told me I had to arrest her. The woman and the vehicle had an infant in the back seat. I was in a marked vehicle, which is not allowed to transport minors. I had to confiscate the woman's ID and inform her that she had to walk to the MP station with her child and that she was a detainee at the time. I moved her vehicle out of the intersection into a safe area then returned to my vehicle. Her husband was in a school and she just wanted to get groceries. She couldn't get a hold of him and didn't know anyone from his unit to get a ride. I'm sure she probably won't read this. But in the off chance you do, I'm so sorry. Thinking back now, I wish I would have taken you to get groceries myself and taken whatever punishment came my way. Definitely not one of my proudest days as an MP. As I understand, police have just about full discretion on most everything except domestic abuse. My husband and I just took our CCW class where the guy explained why they have to make an arrest, at least here in Vegas, on domestic abuse. A woman called the police claiming domestic abuse. The police showed up, she had a bump on her head, was sitting at the curb. The policeman saw the husband walking out screaming at her. They told him to take a walk. They told the wife to go inside and lock the door. They left. Ended up that the husband came back with a claw hammer and beat the wife to death. The family of the wife sued the police department. The attorneys who represented the police department told them they are not allowed to leave a domestic abuse scene without making an arrest. I'm not an officer, however I did get pulled over for the second time in my life about a month ago. Quick backstory. The first time I was pulled over, I was 19 and my car registration was expired. I'd only started driving the year before and it completely forgot to renew. Just a dumb mistake. So I get pulled over and there's two lovely officers, one male, one female, that take turns talking to me. I'm polite and so are they. It turns out that my headlights have an auto-on feature for nighttime but my backlights do not. So I had no tail lights on when driving. Only brake lights when I hit the brakes. My headlights were on so I didn't know. In any case, they tell me what's going on. The problem though was when they ran my plate, they have to for any stop, and realize my damn registration is expired. By over a year. I explained that my car is registered in my spouse's name. Not mine. Both of our cars are. This car was just overlooked since we both forgot it was not in my name so we only re-registered the one. That's a whole other story in itself. So now I spent a good 15 minutes listening to these two kind officers talk to whoever they had to call on their walkies to basically ask permission to write me a ticket instead of taking me to jail. It turns out that lapsing registration more than one time is an arrestable offense. Even if the first time was over 10 years previous. They were so kind and brought up that I'd had no other tickets or traffic problems since and even mentioned that they already started writing the ticket. They hadn't. I was so thankful they were being so kind and in the end they were able to give me a ticket only. I was really thankfully they told me about my lights too. I could have caused an accident. Not me but my dad and I was just barely old enough to remember this at the age of 6 but my aunt, the single most important person in my life, died just before my 7th birthday due to cancer. It tore the family apart but none more so than my dad who had always struggled with alcohol. So does most of my family honestly, but he got smashed. I mean couldn't talk straight let alone see straight levels of smashed and took his motorcycle for a drive. My dad shit-faced drunk ran a red light. Got T-boned by a van of some kind. Went through two people's yards. Smashed a picket fence to pieces and rammed into a parked car. How he was alive after that I don't really know but the officers that arrived on the scene cited my father as a crying mess. All he could do was sob uncontrollably and call for my Aunt Kim or his baby sister. They admitted that they felt awful for him but they had to book him. My dad then spent 9 months in a house on the other side of town with 7 or so other grown men doing some kind of detox routine. I wasn't allowed to visit often and I barely remember the house as a whole but I do remember that my uncle Bill was worried about my dad committing suicide at the house so he got drunk and smashed his old Firebird to get put in the same house as my dad. A buddy of mine and his friend climbed one of those tall cranes. This was during Christmas time and this one had Christmas lights on it all lit up. It was pretty cool looking. Once they got to the top, they saw a cop car pull up to the base of the crane. They stopped climbing down. My buddy was going down first and his friend was going after him. When he got to the bottom, it was a female cop. Lucky for him. He's extremely charming. While his friend was still climbing down, he said to the lady cop, pretty dumb first date idea. She said she wouldn't have given him or her a ticket if it weren't for her supervisor sitting in the patrol car. They got like $150 tickets each and had to attend a Making Better Choices seminar or something like that. A person who was on probation in a state mandated class with me was driving with multiple pounds of marijuana wrapped and intended for a big sale. He witnessed a massive crash and had to choose to either be the first responder or call 911 and flee with the weed. He chose to stay and administer CPR until the police and ambulances arrived. Afterwards, the cop pulled him to the side and said, "Look, I know what I'm smelling from your car. Hand me the pot, and we'll forget all about it." This guy hesitated long enough that the cop realized what was going on and asked how much he had. To which he showed the cop. Long story short, he was charged with a misdemeanor possession charge instead of felony trafficking. This one time my partner and I was looking for a guy with a warrant for minor injuries and small damages. I think that maybe a car crash. Not big deal. First we go to the address listed in the warrant. Just in case. And we find that the suspect was still living there. Well, I thought. An easy one. The suspect was in a wheelchair. Colostomy bag included. From that accident. He ran a red light. And to avoid T-bone crashing the other vehicle. Swerve and roll his car. Crashing roof first against a utility post. Breaking his back. The other car owner sue him for a fender bender. And a injured neck. It was really sad have to take him to prison. Not a cop. But I saw Suicide Boys last month and after the gig a van full of police pulled up. About 6 of them and 8 of us. Told us to get our IDs because we were getting searched. Anyway. I grew up in the hood and my mom, although not a police officer, worked in the law enforcement area for most of her life and I always knew that the best way to get off the hook is to be respectful. So as soon as they asked if anyone was carrying any drugs I said yes I am. You can search me. And gave them my drugs. I only had 2 joints worth of hash on me. Not a big deal. The officer only asked to see my little drug bag to see if I had any more. Gave me back my hash and when I was giving him my ID he told me don't worry. It's not necessary. The most chill raid ever. And I was the only person carrying stuff and I was also the only one who didn't get ID'd. I don't know if it was because I was also the only girl in the group or because I was very cooperative and polite, saying please. Thank you. Have the rest of a good night etc. I've seen many things go wrong because someone talked a bit too much and to be honest, it's not really worth the trouble most of the time. I'm hitting the tail end of this thread. But this story is one of my favorites. Again. Not a cop. I was a reckless teenager trying to impress my then boyfriend. We'd been at a local mountain range. Drinking, although most of it came back up for me. And I had to drive my mother's car home before she noticed it was still gone. Boyfriend was older. A bad boy. I was cute i.e. socially awkward and insecure. My father had told me once about his crazy days in HS. When he and his friends would speed through the roads without caution. Calling these dangerous stretches of burnt rubber a testament to blind faith. This was my night. Billy and I hopped in the car and headed home. He had no idea what I was about to do. I remember giving him this totally manic look. And he freaked out. What are you doing? That's when I floored it. Flew through a good 20 streets and 3 to 5 red lights before being overtaken by the dreaded sirens and lights. I pull over. Terrified. Managed to sneak a mint into my mouth. And wait. The cop who pulled my over walks up. Huge white guy. Bald. Menacing. And says, "Are you f***ing retarded?" The weight of my actions and stupidity crushed the breath out of me. But I managed to squeak out, "Yes, sir." The rest of the conversation transpired like one would between a disappointed father and his daughter. And by some miracle unspoken connection or understanding he let us drive the next 2 blocks home with a warning that he'd be watching and I'd better not make the same mistake twice. I kept my word and I've been driving like a granny since. I'm a former dispatcher / 911 operator. I got a Friday late night call about a vehicle that had been parked but running for a few hours. The responding officers found the owner passed out drunk in the driver's seat. Since the keys were engaged in the ignition and he was in the driver's seat, he was technically operating a vehicle under the influence and was arrested for DUI. If he would have crawled into the passenger's seat or backseat, he would have been in the clear. Turns out that my sister knew him and he had just been accepted as a firefighter recruit, which is why he was partying in the first place. He was rejected from the program Monday morning. Open bracket. Edit. I forgot a couple of things. His vehicle was parked in the lot for the bar he was in. He never left or tried to drive. He said that he knew he was too drunk to drive and was going to sleep it off in the backseat, but he passed out before he could crawl back there. This was long before Uber and a cab would have cost more than his bar tab. I was driving back to school for a test. I was about an hour out and speeding 80 in a 65 to get there in time. Out of the corner of my eye, I realized I just drove past about 3 police cars parked on the side of the highway. They definitely saw me. My heart rate jumps as I start eyeing my rearview mirror. Fuck. One starts to pull out and speed up. I immediately pull over to a stop on the shoulder before the cop car even turns his lights on. Then I see him turn his lights on in the distance and then pull up behind me. My car is a mess. College problems. Officer comes up to my window and asks why I pulled over. I was definitely speeding and didn't realize it until I passed you. So I pulled over. He's suspicious. People definitely don't normally do this. He thinks I am hiding drugs and I pulled over because I was nervous. Asks me if he can search the vehicle. To which I agree. His buddies show up a few minutes later with a police dog. They go through my car and my trunk and find nothing. 30 minutes later. He's sending me on my way with no ticket for speeding. Woot. I tell him I am late to a test and he gives me his card and writes me a nice note for my teacher. No details about the speeding. Just that it was out of my control. Double woot. Not a cop, but I had read a story from a cop. He was on night patrol and stopped a car. The driver was an old man. He seemed bit under the influence. He had lost his wife that day and was grieving. He had to make a stop at grocery stop to get alcohol to drown his sorrow. His house was less than half-mile from grocery store. Cop was sympathetic to his predicament. He let him go with a warning. Next morning, cop turned on the local news on TV and they showed a car that ran over 2 kids in the parking lot of a grocery store. Previous night. Resulting in casualties. He could never forgive himself. Not a cop, but a cop helped me out and helped me get the charges dismissed. In 2013 I rear-ended a blacked out armored University Police Suburban. I only damaged the bumper. My insurance was billed $135, but totaled my car. I had my glasses destroyed and got a nasty concussion. I was arrested by a state trooper as the university police were involved. He walked me into an ambulance and undid the cuffs and started laughing. He explained that they ordered my arrest so he detained me for show but was going to let me go when the doctors said I was good to go. Before the ambulance even left for the hospital, he had given me a business card for an attorney who ended up not charging me. The only fees I paid was a $25 court fee for my arraignment. All charges were dismissed and I went on my merry way.